Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of India's World with me, Rausan Pereira. India has raised tariffs on 28 items exported from the US with effect from Sunday in retaliation to America's withdrawal of preferential access for Indian products from 5th of June. The Commerce Ministry had on Friday made public India's intention to go ahead with imposition of duty on American products, a move New Delhi had previously deferred in the hope of striking a trade deal. Meanwhile, a senior American diplomat has warned that the US-India defense ties will be put at risk should New Delhi purchase Russian-made S-400 air defense systems, also noting that India should think very carefully about making such strategic choices. All this ahead of US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's official visit to India. New Delhi would be Pompeo's first stop and South Korea his last during a nearly week-long visit to the Indo-Pacific region beginning June 24th. That would also take him to Sri Lanka and Japan. 2 weeks ahead of his travel to India, Pompeo said that this bilateral relationship is incredibly important to both the countries. On this edition of India's World, we will take stock of India-US ties ahead of Pompeo's visit to Delhi. Joining me on the program today are Jayant Dasgupta, former ambassador of India at the World Trade Organization, Surendra Kumar, former ambassador, and Harinder Sekhon, senior fellow, Vivekananda International Foundation. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Jayant Dasgupta, I'd like to begin the program with you. Let's first try and analyze this whole tariff war now that we are seeing between India and the United States. It was put off for some time, hoping that some kind of a trade deal could be reached, but here we have it on the table and it's official now. So so what's likely to happen? All this happening before Pompeo's visit to India?
The US imposed tariffs on us on steel and aluminium last year, and last June we had decided to retaliate by imposing tariffs on 29 items. But of course we didn't implement that decision, and it kept getting put off. So now I think the time has come for us to tell the US that we are very disappointed with what they have been doing on the trade front. And this is only a token gesture, but it is a gesture very clear that we are disappointed with the way the US has been taking us for granted, and that we deserve to be treated as equal partners in our trade relationship. So I think not more than this should be read into this whole decision. And of course, Mike Pompeo's visit had been announced much earlier, but this decision also about imposing tariffs on 28 items was taken quite some time back. And Mike Pompeo's visit will take place in the backdrop of this, so he also knows that India, if it comes to digging its heels in to take a tough stance, will not shy away from it. So that will help in the negotiations, perhaps.
Okay. Ambassador Surendra Kumar, let me come to you now. Talking about this whole tariff war that we are seeing, we know that China and the United States are really into it. It's quite bad as far as the China and the United States are concerned. For us, it has just begun. But how would you look at it? Is it just an irritant? Is it more than that? Is it something that could pose problems later?
One has to understand the style of function of President Trump since he came. He, the first billionaire businessman turned into politician, President of the United States. He looks everything business sense, give and take, how much plus minus. Now, our tariff war, whatever you can call it, can't be seen in isolation. Since he has been saying whole world is taking advantage of USA. They send things, we don't impose duty, very low duty when we send American products. Now he keeps on giving example of Harley-Davidson motorbike. Now this Harley-Davidson motorbike riders are his strongest lobby in USA. But if you see in our trade terms, he can verify with me. Total export of Indian motorbike to USA in 2017 were only worth US $7 billion. 7 million. Now, you are talking 7 million when you are exporting 17 billion worth of defense. It doesn't make any sense. But as a point, he will do it. Secondly, his style is like a poker player. He raises stakes, raises temperature, put maximum pressure, bring medicine, then come down. He told North Koreans, we will have to destroy North Korea. He met the same person in Singapore, said, I am in love with him. He puts pressure to come to some level where you can make a deal. Now, we should say this trade deal is one aspect, and we have to see overall relations with India-US, which has transformed beyond recognition last 30 years. This is perhaps the best phase of India-US relations. If you see the overall picture, you can imagine a country with which in 2000 we were exporting bilateral trade 6 billion, now to 143 billion. This country will send 7th fleet to your 71 war, Bangladesh, is selling everything we want to. Every our defense wing has got long inventory to buy things. 17 billion is just last 7 years. You can talk about last 10 years, you can never run with billions of dollars. They have declared you major defense partner. Access to all kind of sophisticated, they are now giving. They have also given you access to some kind of facility they have not given. They give only NATO or their allies. So this one aspect, but more important for us is how USA will handle us two issues: oil import from Iran, defense import from Russia. So one affects our energy security, other affects our defense security, national security. Now, if they treat us strategic partner, treat us major defense partner, they must be sensitive to our needs. India as a country cannot be just trade, water trade. No, you must see in overall context. You want to use India as a very important member of Indo-Pacific designs. On the other hand, you want to weaken them. Don't buy this from Russia. Don't buy oil from them. Your outlook is very narrow. You have to have some more broader perspective, put the broader objective of bilateral relationship, and trade should fit in there.
Right.
It can't be seen in isolation.
Sure. Okay. So since we are here, since we are talking about Iran and since we are talking about oil, let me take that point forward with Harinder Sekhon. You know, as far as this whole issue in West Asia is concerned, it seems to be getting out of hand. You know, we have 2 fresh tankers that have been attacked over last week. You know, the Americans squarely blaming Iran. Iran is a very close ally, really, of India. We've had great relations with Iran over the years. So is Iran going to be a sticking point, really, between the relation, when you look at bilateral ties between India and the United States? Can we see the issue of oil being taken up when Pompeo is here?
Oil would definitely be taken up because Iran is very important for our energy security and also for the supply of LNG. And if you remember in 2007-8, when the nuclear deal was getting negotiated, India had voted against Iran in the nuclear at the NSG, you know, and voted along with the United States. And there was a lot of criticism of Indian policy at that time. And I think India had realized that it would need to act in its own self-interest, not getting dictated by any power, whether it's the United States. And right now, I think the world has really moved on. If you see that we have to balance our relations between China, the United States and Russia. And with the other two also, we have very important relations, especially when it comes to defense. And to hold ourselves hostage to US whims, because at one time when, you know, last year when Nikki Haley had come, she said that, you know, with our friends and partners, we would need to make an exception. But so the message was that there has to be some kind of a quid pro quo, and you have to treat India differently. And I think, as was mentioned earlier in this panel, that, you know, you have to have an overall picture of where you want India-US relations to be. And India alone cannot be held responsible for this. I think there has to be some stability and a commonality of factor, because when you're talking about the Indo-Pacific, you're talking about defense, and then singling out India, you know, that you cannot buy the S-400 from Russia, or you cannot buy oil from Iran, and the US would substitute. So I think this is where we also need to engage more effectively, because Trump loves grabbing headlines, and you know, so this is where we need to see, because, and the other thing you need to keep in mind is that it is an, you know, Trump heads to an election year. So I think he needs to, so you have to see like where exactly can you find common ground with the United States, because here is our government newly elected with a very strong mandate. They're capable of taking tough decisions, and there you have Trump, you know, who came on this whole thing of generating employment, economic upswing, and he goes into an election year.
Right. Right.
So I think this is where we need to look and what we can
I
extract
think the bottom
for
line
ourselves.
being common ground, and what this common ground really can be is something that we need to analyze and speak about. Yes, go ahead.
Well, Iran is not only oil. Iran is also important for us for access to central republics.
Yeah, north-south corridor.
Chabahar Airport, north-south international
Right,
corridor.
absolutely.
Now, you can't really go on imposing.
And Afghanistan?
The problem is with the US is that, look, they are using extraterritorial use of CASA. Now, these are internal law, but you want to forward because your means, so long as international transactions are taking place in dollar currency, they can make things difficult for the Europeans, for Chinese, for India, for everybody, unless you find some countries can start, like India and Iran can buy, but this is all limited scope. You can exchange in rupees or dinars, or some other countries can trade, but internationally, you have not reached a stage where you can find alternative currency which can be international transaction.
Yes. Ambassador Jayant Dasgupta, your thoughts on the entire, oil and everything that's happening in West Asia, and how much of an impact it can have on India, really?
I think our energy security is paramount. And of course, the US has time and time again promised that there would be no reduction in the overall oil availability in the global market. And Mike Pompeo himself has said that we are prepared to raise our production, and we are prepared to provide India with enough oil and gas, both. Of course, there is some dissension in the ranks of the OPEC, and the production of oil has not really gone up. If the trend, Brent crude price trends are to be seen, they have shown an upward trend in the past few days. So we have to ensure our own security, and as Ambassador Surendra Kumar has mentioned, if we could trade in some currency, or do barter trade as we used to do earlier, in the earlier instance when there were sanctions against Iran before the nuclear deal, that would ease the situation a bit. And we can't forego our option of an alternative access to Central Asian republics and to Afghanistan through the Chabahar port and through Iran. So these are imperatives which are very important for us. We can't give up on them.
Certainly. One quick reaction on Iran, and then we'll move on to other aspects. We'll talk about Russia and the Indo-Pacific in particular. Availability of oil, Harinder, Sekhon, is one thing. But at the end of the day, we have to look at the feasibility as far as our refineries and our storage facilities are concerned as well. Because they are far more tuned to, to working with Iranian oil. So that's going to be a problem as well. Absolutely. At the end of the day, we need to safeguard our own interests, and how we do that also remains to be seen. One aspect that has already been spoken about is probably transferring oil in the high seas. Whether we do that or not remains to be seen. But these are options, obviously, that we need to work out.
And I think basically it's the currency swap agreements, if we can work that out, because about 6 months back, and even more recently, the Iranian foreign minister was at my think tank, and this whole issue was discussed, because for us it is very important to send a message, because on the one hand we are talking about our strategic independence, strategic autonomy, and if we keep we succumb to US pressure, it does not send a very positive message. And as I just mentioned earlier, with a newly elected government, which is very focused on India's priorities and India's foreign policy interests, I think we would need to negotiate with the United States. They do understand, when you speak with their officials, even if you are discussing Russia and the need to balance our imports, defense imports, for the very reason that most of our platforms, 60 to 70% of our weapons are still of the Soviet era. So we are dependent on them for. So similarly with Iran, not just oil, it is of course easier for us, the distance is less. Apart from the high seas, I think there is a via media which can be worked out of the currency, exchange barter kind of a system, which is a workable mechanism. But I think the bigger message is, as has been pointed out in the panel, about the alternative route to Central Asia. and the stability of Afghanistan, because the US may be in an exit mode, mood to exit from Afghanistan, but they know that having invested so much in the past 18 years, they cannot afford to let, there's a whole generation of Afghans which has grown up while, when the US was there.
Right.
And this youth, you cannot sacrifice them and say that we are not, you're not our responsibility. So I think we do have a lot of points to negotiate with the United States. And as I said, Trump has to grab the headlines. He has to make statements because he is heading into an election year. But at the same time, I think we need to find a via media of working both with Iran in the region and the Indo-Pacific, where the US and India see a lot of commonalities.
Commonality, absolutely. Yeah, there are several issues that need to be discussed and that need to be settled is what is being discussed about right now. But Ambassador Surendra Kumar, one of the sticking points, do you believe, could be the S-400 defense system?
It's very serious. The problem is that, again, you analyze, he is a businessman. What are you saying? If you will do inside story, don't buy from them. We will give you something 5 years down the line. You buy American petrol start, then this is kind of you're forcing, okay, you forego your option now, but after 5 years, 6 years, we will develop something we'll give you. That also price may be higher than this. So these always business angle he's talking about. Only good thing for us, this trade war or tariff war you can call between US and China, give some leeway to us. Because many Chinese are much more. After all, they are $12 trillion economy. We are hardly less than $3 trillion. We have some asymmetry is much larger than between. They can stand up pressure from USA to a great extent. We can't. But many companies are being forced to go out of China. We hope some of them will come invest in India. That's our hope is there. Many of the products which can be produced by companies there, they can start producing it here. So we have some kind of leeway. In fact, whenever there is a tense sort of relationship between USA and China, what is happening right now? If you see very cynical way of looking at it, we are in a very happy situation. Both China and USA want us to closer to each other. Americans would like us to be on their side. We don't want to choose side. We don't want to count, but at the same time, we are in a happy situation. We simply watch this game. At the same time, protect because our relationship is so multi-dimensional. USA, I was saying, border picture is so enormous that this trade issue is very, very minuscule. But security issue, yes, putting pressure on us not to buy cannot be accepted by any government. Because there is national security. And when you say you are robust leader, resolute leader, suddenly public, all the opposition will go on, or you are buckled under pressure. I wrote an article which came 2 days back. I say in a classroom, a bully bullies you more when you get frightened. Bullies normally back off when you stand up to them. Now, stage has come, it's not in publicly, but in our discussions, very strongly saying there are some red lines. We cannot. Iran is one, Russia is one. Russia, 80, 60%, 70% of our defense equipment is still there. How can we suddenly turn to you? But you should be happy that you have become India's largest defense exporter.
Right.
Such a short time. A country which was sending 7-3 to fight, you have become largest exporter last 7-8 years. You should be happy. And then there's long inventory. All the Air Force, Navy, Army, they all want to buy things from USA. So USA will have a lot of businesses, but you can't totally wipe out our relationship or defense built on 60 years.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Old friends cannot be forgotten or old friends cannot be sidelined is what you're suggesting. Jayant Dasgupta, this whole tariff and trade war between United States and China, is that an opportunity for India, and what must be done so as to, for us to, work on that opportunity?
The first thing is that, we have identified about 131 tariff lines vis-a-vis China, against which the US was exporting to China. Now, our global exports in those tariff items are quite high, about $32 billion. But it remains to be seen whether we have the production capacity and the required technology and the standards to meet the Chinese requirements. So that is a big if. On the other side, again, the Chinese products that the US has imposed tariffs on, there are about 531 odd, against which we have found that we have global exports of about $22 billion in quite a few items taken together. But again, we have to see whether the Americans are they require the same kind of products that we are exporting against those tariff lines, or they need higher technology, more uniformity, higher standard products. So that is the first thing. The second point is that we need to provide an enabling environment. We are still, though we have progressed quite a bit on ease of doing business, we still have a large number of constraints. Our transportation and logistics, of course, is one big worry. The second is the quality of power. The third, which is not, of course, less important, is about labor relations, about acquisition of land for setting up new factories. And finally, we have to have the states on board, because the central government can't alone do everything. A large number of things are within the remit of the state governments. So everybody has to move together and provide an enabling, welcoming environment. And while I am on it, the last point I would like to mention is that we have some of the highest tax regimes in the world. Our corporate income tax is 30% for non-MSME sector. For MSMEs, it is 25%. The world over, the rates are around 20% or 15%. For instance, the investments which may move out of China or alternatively be coming to other destinations like Vietnam, like Indonesia, Malaysia, Mexico, etc. There, by and large, the tariff the corporate income tax is about 15%. So this will be a big dampener on the investment decisions taken by companies, apart from the other factors that I have mentioned.
Right.
So in order to attract investments, we have to choose which sectors we want them in, and we need to choose labor intensive ones as well as high tech ones, because that is where the future lies.
Sure.
And then we have to provide this enabling environment in short order.
Okay. All right. We've spoken about some of the sticking points or the irritants really as far as the bilateral relationship between India and the United States are concerned. Let's talk about some of the areas of mutual cooperation, areas where we've seen a lot of common ground, because the relationship has grown by leaps and bounds in recent times. Harinder, Sekhon, one of them is also because of the Indo-Pacific and the interests of both India and the United States in the region.
The Indo-Pacific is something which even the Obama administration had recognized India as one of the linchpins of US foreign policy, US engagement. And I think the whole pivot strategy of Obama focused and relied very heavily on India to play an active role. Now, while the Indo-Pacific or the Asia-Pacific, as it was called at that time, is very important to India, we also need to keep in mind that it is important to us independently of the United States. This is where India has been focused since 1992, when we evolved the Look East policy, which is now the Act East policy. And we've stepped up our engagement with ASEAN and with BIMSTEC. So we have concerns independent of the US concerns over here. But the fact that the US has co-opted us to be one of the major players along with the United States, to be one of the big players, be a part of the Quad mechanism, I think it does give us that strategic heft. But at the same time, we cannot be coerced into taking actions which are seen as being hostile to any other country in the Indo-Pacific.
Absolutely. Considering
that we have our own border issues, we are the only one which shares a long border, a land border with China. And I think to keep that border diffused and to avoid a Doklam-like episode or incident, that is something which is very important for us.
Sure.
And so here we have to balance our interests. The signaling is very important that we are part of this US-led mechanism.
Right.
But I think we have done well to play, to highlight our partnership with Japan in the Indo-Pacific, which is more an economic partnership, and this is something which has been facilitated. The trilateral and the bilateral may have been facilitated by the United States. But I think Abe and Modi both share a very good relationship. Economically, we want to do a lot together, including look at connectivity corridors.
Sure.
So I think this economic via media, what we are trying to explore independent of the United States is something very important for us.
Right.
And at the same time, yes, we can carry on with our military exercises, which we do, like the bilateral ones, even with China occasionally and with Russia.
Sure.
And with Japan and the United States, the Malabar has been going on for a number of years. So I think we need to keep up with the engagement in the Indo-Pacific.
Absolutely. All right. Quick closing comments now from all my guests. I've got 2 minutes left on the program, starting first with you, Ambassador Surendra Kumar, on the best way forward really and what to expect from Pompeo's visit to India.
Well, I think Americans are wise enough not to rock the relationship which has really grown so much in the last 20 years and not see different aspect in sort of isolation. They have to use broader perspective. I think India is the best friend they can find. If you look around the globe right now, same is the case with India, as Prime Minister want to use for realizing our domestic agenda of economic development, USA has to be there. So we have to develop mutual kind of trust, mutual confidence and try to sensitive to each other. You can't just go berserk and make announcement, we do it. Indo-Pacific, for example, Prime Minister recently said Maldives, Sagar. He talked about security and growth for all region. The Indo-Pacific, we can't see like Americans is only for military or maritime sense. No, we see differently. But we personally feel that we have a huge scope of this relationship going still further than what it has done in last 10 years.
Absolutely. Ambassador Jayant Dasgupta?
There are two aspects. The first one is about defense. We can't put our eggs all in one basket. And the Russians have been staunch allies of ours over decades. So we can't really abandon them just because the US is asking us to do so. We have to balance it. And there is this example of a NATO country, Turkey, which is also buying the S-400. And it has told the US very plainly that it will carry on with its plans. So that is on the defense front. Of course, we need to be a part of this Indo-Pacific alliance of India, Japan, Australia, and the other countries, because we also have grave concerns about China's recent actions in the recent past. On trade, we have to keep talking, and there are some genuine concerns of the US. So some of those where we have elbow room to accommodate their requests, we need to accommodate their requests, but not at the cost of our national interests.
Absolutely.
Where it concerns a national interest, we have to say a firm no.
Sure. All right. And Dr. Sekhon, please close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
I think Pompeo's visit is going to focus a lot on the next 2+2 dialogue. The inaugural one was in September, and they're looking at a convenient date for the next 2+2 strategic dialogue. And I think having invested so much in its relationship with India, and vice versa, we've invested a lot in our relationship with the US. I think we both have gone too far to really let this relationship flounder. And there's just one trajectory because of the people-to-people connect between India and the United States. I think it is a very strong relationship. But the US needs to realize that India is still a developing economy.
Right.
And while we need to stick with the decisions we take and facilitate the ease of doing business and not be too, protectionist, but at the same time, the US needs to realize that we have huge developmental challenges and India cannot open up the economy to unequal competition.
Absolutely.
When we have 600 million people still living in rural areas and who need to be elevated and uplifted.
Sure.
So I think the message is very positive. There are a lot of commonalities. And I think and the other positive thing is that the two of us are talking and also discussing where we do not agree.
Right.
Which did not happen a few years back.
Sure. All right. On that note, I'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of India's World. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that there are several commonalities as far as India and the United States are concerned, and we need to build on those and ensure that the relationship goes to new heights. Issues are always there, just like any other relationship, but we need to work on them and deal with them separately, is what the panelists are suggesting. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.